People who knew murderers. When did you know something was off?
Story number 1 sat next to him in choir class. He was always kind of off. He operated on his own wavelength, constantly in his own world, never really engaging with anybody. People just didn't really exist on his radar. On a class trip, we slept in the same hotel room, and he walked around naked like I wasn't even there. I always assumed he was autistic, but in hindsight, it might have been something much worse, like schizophrenia. He never seemed violent, but nobody ever talked to him enough to ever make that conclusion in the first place. A few months ago, he beat and stabbed his mother to death with a kitchen knife. It was so bad, dental records were needed to identify the body. He cut off one of her breasts and implied in his confession that he ate part of it. He waited until his dad came home from work to show him what he'd done. Claimed he saw a sign from the devil that told him to kill her. That may have been a lie. From what I heard, he was very excited to tell the police what he had done. And from what I do know about him, he might have said it for the attention. He turned himself in, waived his Miranda rights, and confessed to everything. When the cops found him, he was literally soaked in blood. He refused to shower it off, so they had to hose him down before they put him in a cell. He's looking at 40 years in prison. His mom was an amazing woman. She tailored our suits for choir and was constantly volunteering. If there was an event, she was there. She was going to be her town's councilwoman next year. She loved her son very much. She didn't deserve to die like that. Story number 2. Obligatory didn't know him as a friend, but a regular customer in my shop. He would come in after his shift to buy beer and tobacco. On one occasion, he caught and helped us to evict a shoplifter. He seemed friendly enough. Then a local girl went missing and was eventually pulled out of a river a few weeks later. They announced they were looking for somebody in connection with her death, and it was him. They had CCTV footage of him tailing her through a park and footage of him buying beer in a shop, still unconfirmed to this day being our shop as they blurred out the surroundings. Anyway, as we had a TV in our shop switched to the news channel as it was a rolling story local to us, we started to discuss the guy, if we saw him on the day she went missing, that kind of thing. We hadn't, but it was at that point when one of my staff, a young girl, who had previously said to management that she didn't want to work the closing shift anymore because there was too many creepy men around, told us that he used to stare at her when he came into the store in a way that made her uncomfortable enough to not want to be on the floor when he came in. They never got to question him about the murder as he was found dead in a local park a few days later. He'd hung himself. Story number 3. I moved to a new town when I was 19 and was making new friends at my new job. I met this girl at work and she invited me over to hang out with her and her best friend. I went and the best friend's boyfriend was there and the vibes were way off. I was uncomfortable. He was cold and just seemed angry for no reason. They had mentioned to me before he got there that he was always controlling and had hit the girl before. Turns out controlling was an understatement. She came home one day and he was digging a hole in the backyard and she asked what he was doing. And he replied, digging your grave. He hit her, said if he can't have her, nobody could have her, all of that. So eventually she left him and had to get a restraining order and everything. He somehow persuaded her to get in a car with him on her work break, and they went missing for a few days. Turns out he stabbed her to death, threw her in a river, and killed himself. I met the girl only a few times, and him only the one time, but the fact that I was in such close proximity to someone capable of that gives me chills. She was so young, it was really sad. Story number 4. I never suspected a thing. She was the nicest woman. I even let her babysit my cousin when I had custody of him for a little while. She was my neighbor from a few houses down and everyone loved her. She grew gigantic pumpkins, was always outside, so everyone interacted with her a lot. I moved away and a few years later was shocked to hear everything from my family and friends who still lived in the area. She was married to a man. I knew him from my time living there too. One day he was just gone. She was all beaten up. She said he beat her up. We always suspected this happened before this incident, and had left her because he got a woman pregnant a few towns over. We never heard from him again, but didn't really have a reason to. She would mention every once in a while that he was still harassing her, and she was even beat up on another occasion after his disappearance. He was self-employed and didn't really have any family. No one suspected anything. 3 years later, she was dating another man. While dating this man, the police were investigating her for stealing money from the grocery store she worked at. They went to the boyfriend's cabin, where they both were, to arrest her. She came to the door, said, "Okay, let me go put on some clothes." The police waited at the door. I obviously wasn't here for this part, so this is what I hear. The police then hear 2 gunshots. They run inside, and she had poured gasoline and set the house on fire, then shot her dog, then herself. It took some time to get the house fire under control. Once they did, and began investigating, they found another body in the basement that didn't die in the fire, but several days earlier. The body in the basement was her boyfriend. Then they began investigating further, and found a blue 55-gallon drum in her backyard that contained her husband. So, she killed 2 people and her dog, and all she was suspected of was stealing from the grocery store. Story number 5. Looking back, I should have known immediately, but I didn't even know what I was seeing. In 2016, I was working as a server, and one of my coworkers was always complaining about her shitty husband and how they always fought. They were from Chicago, and kind of just always loud and aggressive, so I didn't think much of it. One night, they both came in for dinner and drinks and sat in my section. I was looking forward to finally meeting her husband so I could give him a face. I just remember not being able to look him in the eye. I felt super uncomfortable anytime I needed to go over to their table because my friend would try to spark convo, and I wanted to talk to her, but the guy's presence just sitting there would make my skin crawl. They left that night, but soon she stopped coming to work. A few weeks later, news broke about the murder-suicide, husband being the murderer. It was heartbreaking. And I no longer take mentions of domestic disputes lightly. Story number 6. I knew this kid my entire life. We were friends in elementary and middle school. More middle school. He was your typical redneck kid, but a kind person. Imagine if Pinky from Pinky and the Brain grew up in the rural South. Well, as people do in school, we drifted apart. He honestly wasn't the person in the group I was friends with. He was just in that circle. So we went about our lives. A year after we graduated in the same town we all grew up in, he killed his entire family. Mother, brother, stepsister, father. Just for no reason. Nothing really provoked him from my understanding. He left and went to ride ATVs with his friend later that day. They caught him and he had no memory of it. He went to court and got life and never could recount a single moment. At least he said. It was weird seeing this kid who was to your knowledge just dumber than a bag of hammers, yet an odd innocence to him, on a trail for such atrocities. He just sat stone-faced the entire time, almost like he didn't understand what had happened. Not to say I felt bad for him, but I felt something, sadness perhaps. Story number 7. I know one and still keep in contact with him. We all knew he had issues with rage, but we never thought he would have killed someone. We worked together at this restaurant for a while, and we got really close. Like, if I wasn't in a committed relationship at the time, I would have dated him. He was super chill, down to earth, and the sweetest person. Until something triggered him. He didn't get angry often, but he had triggers that would send him into a rage. He was horribly abused as a child by his father, so there was a lot of resentment towards men that looked like his dad or talked down to him. That is where we bonded because I was abused by my mother. Thankfully, I had the resources to manage my trauma. Unfortunately, he did not. His parents believed that God was going to cure his traumas. It got to the point where his mother left, because his father would pull him out of therapy as soon as they would start making progress, and she couldn't deal with it anymore. He ended up suffering from a concussion about 6 months after I met him. He was helping a friend move and had a dresser fall on his head. After this, he wasn't the same. He quit coming into work and went almost radio silent. We would still talk, but we weren't as close as we were before. At the time, I was moving into the city, and he lived in the suburbs, so we had planned on getting together to catch up. A week later, I got a call from my friend at 7 in the morning saying that he was in jail for hiding a body. I was shook. After an investigation, they interrogated him, and he confessed pretty quick. He beat his dad to death with a barbell and tried to hide the body in the house. Afterwards, he ended up trying to kill himself, but was unsuccessful, so he just left the house. After he was booked, I sent him a letter to check in on him. He had suffered from a psychotic episode and only remembers moments from the act. He's now serving 40 years with the possibility of parole after 20. He's medicated and doing really well. Last I checked, he had a few activities he was responsible for managing, and he was working through his traumas with a shrink. Story number 8. My ex. We were middle school sweethearts that led into high school. He was sweet and good to me. We drifted apart but stayed friends. His best friend, about a year later, made a comment while they were drinking about finding me to be attractive, which led my ex to attempt to kill him with rat poisoning. He went to jail as a juvenile and got out. He came back with anger issues and we all kind of went our separate ways. The ex moved to Florida. Next thing we all heard, he was in jail for murder. Like most bad Florida-related stories, he got hooked on meth. Met a girl, and in their desperate attempt to keep their habit going, they targeted this elderly couple. They broke into their home, tied them up, and raided their home. They gave them PIN numbers and anything else they thought of value. In their drugged-up minds, they decided that this elderly couple saw too much. He dug a huge hole and threw the elderly couple in alive. He buried them. Once they felt the job was done, they took their ATM card and was able to get $200 from it. That was it. That was how they were tracked. He is currently on death row for 2 counts of murder and a slew of other crimes, including kidnapping and robbery. And that is the story of my ex, the double murderer. Story number 9. I've worked with 3 murderers in my job supporting people with disabilities. All 3 had varying degrees of learning disabilities. And honestly, only for one of them did I know something was up. He worked out a plea deal as his disability meant that he appeared to lack fitness to plead. I was taking him home after all of the investigation was over. He turned to me and said, "Don't tell my wife about this." It was at that exact moment I knew he knew what he'd done. The other 2 incidents, one was so traumatized by what she'd done that she never recovered. She'd been in prison for 25 years and was broken when she came out. The last was a couple. Another vulnerable adult had gone missing. They even helped with the search teams. They were in bits, really concerned for the welfare of their friend. Went on TV for an appeal for her to come home. She was under their bed the whole time. Story number 10. It was my brother. He died when I was 13. He was 18 at the time. I knew he was capable from the time I was 6 and he was 11. He used to play death games. He would sit on my chest, use his knees to hold down my arms, suffocate me until I passed out, and then wake me up and do it again. There were days where he did this for an hour or more. That's on top of the other kinds of abuse. Anything you can think of, it happened. I was regularly raped, beaten, and suffocated for a year. One time, he made stand in front of him while he punched me in the balls repeatedly. He wanted to make me a man, and he wouldn't stop until I didn't flinch from the pain. I couldn't tell any of this because I was more afraid of him than confident my parents could or would do anything. He was my primary babysitter. After that year, he moved out. My mom worked nights and my stepdad was a truck driver. One night, my brother decided that he would feed me garbage. He cracked an egg onto a plate, put coffee grounds and other crap from the garbage can onto it. When I refused to eat it, he put salt and pepper and said it was now more appetizing. The resulting mess was still there when my mom came home, and she wasn't happy. She told us both that if we couldn't keep the house clean, we weren't allowed to eat her food. He balked at this and moved in with other family. I was finally free for a short time, though I didn't eat anything but school lunch for 2 days until my uncle found out and put a stop to it. From ages 12 to 18, my brother got in a lot of trouble. He was arrested multiple times for assault. He was in and out of alternative programs like Outward Bound and boot camp. Finally, at 17, he was sentenced to 2 years in juvenile detention. He spent a year in and came out to live with a preacher in another nearby town. Eventually, they convinced the parole board he was rehabilitated, and over the objections of our local police, let him off all probation and parole. That preacher introduced him to friends of his who my brother eventually moved in with. He also met a girl. They met right before summer started, and he was in love. To her, it was a summer fling. When she broke up with him, partly due to his controlling and abusive behavior, he lost it. He came back home one weekend to meet up with some friends. He also came to see us. Later, my mom would say she knew something was up with him, but that is all hindsight. Sunday night, he went back home. Monday night, he killed his 3 roommates execution style. He also stole one of the victim's cars. He then drove 8 hours to where his ex was in college. He arrived pretty early Tuesday morning and somehow got into her dorm room. Tuesday morning, he found his ex and shot her in the foot, threatened to kill her, and then locked him, her, and a few of her dorm mates in a room. A 6-hour hostage standoff with police ensued. Eventually, he stuck his head out the window one too many times, and a police sniper shot him right in the neck. He tried shooting at the cops as they stormed in, but he was dying. He died later in the hospital, and my family became national news for a short time. Story number 11. He was the son of my dad's coworker. Before my father got laid off this year, they had worked together for 32 years. So we did occasionally see each other while growing up. The son was my age, went to the same middle school and high school as me. I know that he had some kind of mental disorder involving impulse control. For example, on his way to our middle school one day, he saw a baseball bat lying on a front lawn and decided to use it to smash in the windshield of the car in front of that house. He was also obsessed with death and would talk about wanting to see someone die. Obviously, I was not a big fan of him and did not seek out a friendship. A friend of mine, still my best friend today, felt bad for him and would talk to him before classes and such. One day, she was pulled into the principal's office and told that they found a list he had made of people to not kill in his imagined school shooting. She was on it. I'm not sure what happened with him after that, but I didn't see him again until high school. After graduation, I got a part-time job at a corporate office downtown where I was tasked with making lunch runs. The local restaurants where I would pick up food had a missing person flyer for a boy my age. He was mentally handicapped. His family was worried that he had wandered off into the desert, according to the diner staff that I talked to. A few weeks later, I see my old classmate's mugshot on the local news. He had killed the missing boy. Apparently, he and his small group of friends had befriended this kid and driven him out into the desert one night. My old classmate shot him with a crossbow and then slit his throat. Story number 12. Girl I used to work with 10 some years ago was killed by her ex-boyfriend. He tied her up to make it look like a suicide, but according to her parents, the autopsy said she was dead before she was hung. Dead people don't hang themselves up. She also was not suicidal as far as anyone could tell. Happy girl with dreams to finish her degree, had just bought herself a new car and house. Was just starting to date again. Police just filed it away like nothing happened, though. Have to love small towns. Anyway, he was always off. He was your typical narcissistic, controlling, abusive boyfriend. She constantly had bruises and scratches from his explosive violence. He sent her death threats at work, harassed her coworkers, threatened violence to her family and friends, all that. A week before she was found, he had broken into her house and almost strangled her to death. No surprise he would kill her with the violent temper he had. He began dating another one of my coworkers some years later. We who knew his first girlfriend warned her constantly of what he was like and what we suspect he did. She told us the old sob story of he's changed. Apparently he was a great boyfriend until he chased her and their 2 kids into the bathroom with a knife, barricaded them in, and set the trailer on fire. They're fucking lucky to be alive. The neighbors had called the police after hearing some yelling and threats, so they were able to get out, but I think the whole trailer burned down. The kicker? They stayed together and had another kid. Story number 13. In my case, I grew up knowing the family, so it all seemed normal. But even as a teenager, I could see that there was something wrong with my friend's dad. A big group of us was going to a school dance, and the dad asked for a kiss before we all left, and the dad bit his son, and he was bleeding for a while. It was all shocking and upsetting, but it was soon forgotten because he had done increasingly terrible things in front of us. So, the abuse was normal. His second wife used to babysit me and my brother when we were little and we lived on base. My mom said she helped that woman leave in the middle of the night with her 2 babies at the time, but left the 2 older kids with the dad from another marriage. When my mother got out of her abusive relationship, we were beyond poor. She was working 2 jobs. I remember not eating sometimes at the end of the pay period. That man drew up a contract that my mom would marry him, and they wouldn't have to sleep with each other until she learned to love him. Then went out and got me and my brother the best Christmas I ever remember to try and bribe her. Luckily, she was not fooled. Later, when we all grew up, my best friend at the time dated the younger brother. The older brother went off into the military and got a dishonorable discharge for steroid use. Me and my stupid teenager self dated the older brother after he got booted from the military, and all 4 of us moved down to Florida for a time. What I noticed is how they begin to isolate you, turn you against others, turn you against your best friends and your family. When the dad would come visit, everything is a big family secret, no matter how mundane. My best friend and I had enough of the isolation and abuse, so we took my car that I begged my dad to buy me and left. They caught up with us in Tennessee as we tried to get home and followed us the whole way back to St. Louis, where finally they left when we were back home with our families. While we were gone, the dad remarried and had a baby. What I gathered after the fact is she was planning on leaving and taking the child. He manipulated his 2 damaged and abused sons to help kill this woman and make it look like a drowning at the Lake of the Ozarks. I went to the funeral with my mom, and we knew then. The dad didn't talk to his wife's family and sat next to us the whole time. When it was my turn to view her, I got this feeling of dread. His 2 sons had gone back to Florida and were not at the funeral. When we left, my mom and I sat in silence at an Outback steakhouse. We were sure she was murdered. Ends up he had his oldest son, the one I dated, help hold her underwater while the other son, who dated my best friend, watched the baby from the shore or a house nearby. When my old boyfriend went back to Florida, he had confessed to his mother and his girlfriend at the time and turned himself in from the guilt. Abusive people are manipulative and hold many secrets. You always know what they are, but it happens so slowly over time that you don't understand the scope of their malicious intent. Story number 14. We lived next to a fruit orchard, and there was a house on the orchard that seasonal pickers would live in. It was a well-known fact in the area that nearly all the pickers were in the country illegally if they weren't European backpackers on holiday, and sometimes even then too. There was this lovely family, a wife, husband, and kids that got along really well with us. My mom would chat with them over the fence when she went to tend to the animals, and they'd always ask after us. A couple of weeks into the season, a new guy moved in. Weedy creep of a dude. My mom, bless her, is way too nice to people. She has a real hard time clocking creepy men and doesn't want to be rude to anyone. So she spoke to him when she saw him, and he would start calling out to her from the orchard to talk when he really didn't have anything to say. He'd ogle her, too. Then he started bringing crates of fruit to the house, leaving it on the picnic table in our yard. Which would be nice, I guess, if he didn't consistently do it only when we were out of the house or asleep. It was like every time we would leave the house, he'd be watching, waiting, and then come over. Our animals started getting restless at night, and it turned out even when he wasn't bringing fruit, he was getting into our yard. The fruit was an excuse in case he got caught by anyone. He could just say he was dropping off fruit when really he was skulking around our yard. Someone broke into our garage, and we had no proof it was him, but we definitely knew. Things came to a head when Mom woke up to the dog barking and he was just staring in through the window. Her partner of the time worked night shift and wouldn't be home until morning. She was terrified and ran to my room to hide. I was a pretty bold teenager, so I went and turned all the outside lights on and started yelling and carrying on. It scared him off, at least. Then Mom went over to the fence the next day and had a talk with the husband of the nice couple who lived over there. He was furious and told her he didn't know. That's where the guy was going off to every night, but that he would stop him next time because he didn't want any trouble. He asked us not to tell the police. See, his fear was if the guy kept coming over to our place, we'd call the cops, and the cops would deport everyone. This was a lovely family, and the best neighbors we'd had, so we just agreed to let him deal with it. He basically told us he'd tell the guy to pull his head in because he was in the country illegally, overstaying his visa, and would get deported if he kept going. The next day there were cops over there. Turns out creepy stalker had a knife on him and stabbed the husband to death. Mom was essentially told not to make a statement about the stalking because it was already very open and shut with multiple witnesses watching the stabbing, so no need to get involved in months of court cases. Mom felt really guilty, but what can you do? Not her fault he was a creepy murderer. Story number 15. I met two parents that brutally murdered their 6-year-old son. I was a cable technician and did a service call at their house. I felt something was off because the husband and wife both acted very strangely. The husband was an overly happy and incredibly friendly in a sort of creepy fashion. The wife was very shy and super timid, wouldn't look me in the eyes, kept walking around with her head down. She wouldn't even speak to me. I only saw her for a moment before she quickly disappeared off into one of the back rooms. The house itself was strange too. Every window had a very dark colored sheet or blanket blocking them, making the interior rather dark, and it smelled bad. The couple had 3 children, 2 girls and the boy. However, when I was there, I didn't see the little boy anywhere, only the 2 girls. A few days later, I was watching the local news. I saw that the parents had been arrested for the murder of their son. Shit completely blew my mind. I couldn't believe that I met these evil people. I later learned that the reason why I never saw the little boy while I was at their house is because they regularly abused and tortured him. They also always kept him locked inside of a dog crate in one of the back rooms. It completely broke me for a bit, knowing I was mere feet from him, and I couldn't do anything to help him because I didn't know. Story number 16. He's a childhood friend and is essentially my brother in terms of how close we were while growing up, both only children in the same age. At age 12, he moved out of state because his parents divorced. We lost touch. At age 17, he moved back and we went to the same high school, but we were on different sports teams and just didn't have time to hang out. At age 18, I moved out of state for jobs, university, and so on, and I never moved back to our home state. So, from age 18 to 28, we lost touch. He wasn't on social media either. We randomly reconnected one day while I was visiting home. Then he got on social media at age 28. We'd occasionally catch up once a year or so. At age 33, he started posting conspiracy theory type stuff. Nothing malicious, but it was clear he was looking for strange connections in the universe. He was grasping at straws, Illuminati stuff. He'd privately message me thinking he was on to something. Masons, secret societies. I reminded him that it's important to stay healthy both physically and mentally. His posts and emails weren't too alarming to me. Nothing suggested hatred or malice. In fact, his posts were far more benign than a lot of what gets posted today. A few months later, he murdered a woman and her toddler. It turns out he had been battling schizophrenia for at least a decade, never had proper health care, and had recently turned to drugs, like meth. He was a good old country boy, and it was clear that turning to drugs was just his way of trying to silence his pain. He didn't realize the act he had done, and I think he's still in denial about it. Ever since that horrible act, he's been in jail awaiting trial. We write each other letters every few months. He's doing much better now, as the jail has him on medication. It's truly as if he's like his old self, and his mind is sharp as a tack, and he reminds me of childhood stuff that I had forgotten about. It's very tragic for the family he murdered, and it's very tragic for him and his family too. None of this should have happened. All of this could have been prevented. We grew up on the same street, in a poor suburban neighborhood. He's in jail, and I teach at an Ivy League school. The difference in our outcomes has a lot to do with the care we were shown while growing up. My parents were supportive. The education we received, I went to college, and the health care we received. I had insurance, he did not. The United States is a crazy place. It's hard to get out. It's hard to survive. Everything's a mess, and nobody seems to care. God, I feel so bad for the victims of his act. Story number 17. I was around 13 or 14. He lived with us for a while because he was friends with my unofficial foster brother and needed a place to stay. He was 18 at the time. He was already into the drug scene, acting as an enforcer for dealers. He was huge with massive muscles. I could understand why just having him around could intimidate people, but with me and my family, he was a massive teddy bear. I was an awkward, weird kid, bullied and without many friends. He went out of his way to talk to me and connect with me. One day, I was in my bedroom dancing like a fool. I didn't hear him open the door and come inside, and I was embarrassed. He just smiled and said everyone dances like that sometimes. Then he closed the door, turned up the music, and danced like an idiot himself. At the time, my sisters and their friends would go on late-night adventures, but I was never allowed to come. Looking back, I completely understand why. I was a nervous kid and would have ruined their fun, but at the time, being bullied, I felt the rejection very deeply and would cry when they told me I couldn't go. He would hug me and promise we would go on our own adventure another day. Honestly, I think I had a bit of a crush on him. He was so kind to me. We lost touch when my foster brother was arrested and the gang stopped coming around. Fast forward to 2019. I was 27. There was a double homicide in my city. Everyone was shocked because murders almost never happened here. Drugs were everywhere, but at most we got stabbings once in a while. This time, an elderly couple had been shot to death in their home. Right away, people pointed to the son, who was a dealer in the city. Then in 2020, my sister sent me a news article. 3 men had been arrested for the murders, and it turned out that the guy I knew was the one who pulled the trigger. They killed the parents because the son owed them a lot of money. It was meant to send a message. The guy I knew has a daughter now, and in the article it said he had never been in trouble before. He had never been arrested, but I knew he had been involved for over a decade. People are complicated. I'm sure if I talked to him, he would be just as nice to me as he always was. But he is also capable of murdering 2 innocent people in their own home, and who knows what else he hasn't been charged with. Sometimes you just don't know. Story number 18. A good few years ago, I became friends with the guy I got cocaine from. He was a young guy in his early 20s, nice enough to hang out with. I then went kind of into business with him and his 16-year-old cousin. For them, it was just business, while I was a cocaine addict. The 16-year-old had dropped out of school with very few prospects. He grew up in a low-income, deprived urban area, but he had a plan. He would sell cocaine for a while and save all the money. He knew he would probably go to jail at some point for a few years, but as he said, at least his 1-year-old son would be too young to really remember it. By then, he hoped he would have enough money to go to college, train as a mechanic, and open his own business. At the time, my car was modified and seriously fast, so he was always asking questions about what I had done with the suspension and the engine. He was really smart, to be honest. On a side note, if you want to deal cocaine but avoid too much attention from the police in the city, there are two critical things. Drive a 7-year-old Volvo estate car that looks standard but makes about 450 horsepower, and be white with a cop haircut. You're basically invisible to them then. I used to give them rides, do favors, even babysit their kids once or twice. Like I said, they were nice enough guys. Not close friends, but more than acquaintances. There were never any red flags, well, apart from the obvious fact that they were drug dealers. Then I heard they had gone after an 18-year-old kid who owed them $60 for cocaine. They cut his throat when he refused to pay. I had seen them literally an hour before it happened. We just had a pint, chatted about football, and agreed to meet up the next day. Just the usual. The older of the two managed to keep his little cousin out of it and ended up with a sentence of 25 years to life. It's strange, but I still feel vaguely responsible for that kid dying, even though I wasn't actually involved in any way. That is how and why I quit cocaine and got out of that life. Story number 19. I knew something was off as soon as I met the guy. He was a PhD biostatistician and had been hired as the lead of the department I work in at a clinical research organization. People in those roles are usually pretty quirky and reserved, so when this brash, boisterous, and charismatic new lead started, that alone was enough of an indicator. He constantly bragged about how smart he was and how he had worked at all these places. He worked at my company for about 3 years, which was about 2 years too many. He was exactly like that Seinfeld episode where George acted stressed and angry at work so people would leave him alone. That's exactly what this guy did. He was really good at talking a big game, but never seemed to actually do anything. It all unraveled when he was requested to be removed from a study because he had completely overshot timelines, always with an excuse. A little digging later found that he had basically done no work for about 2 years, but always managed to talk himself out of repercussions. Once it became known, though, it was a classic "you can't fire me because I quit" kind of deal. I thought that was it. About 6 months later, we were called into an emergency boardroom meeting. Everyone was required to attend. Our CEO, voice shaking, started talking about a woman who had been murdered in broad daylight while crossing the street just a day earlier on a Sunday. All of us immediately started thinking, oh no, which former employee was murdered? That's when the shoe dropped. This former head of biostatistics had been named as the murderer. While they wanted us to know, the main reason was to make us aware in case any local news media tried to contact us. Apparently, he still listed our company as his place of work on LinkedIn. As the days went by, we found out everything that actually happened. He and his current wife had enacted a plan to murder his ex-wife to stop the payments he was still making to her, most likely child support. He had moved away from Maryland to Kentucky. Down there, he bought a gun and drove all the way back to Maryland. He dressed up as a woman and shot her in the head as she crossed the street. He then fled back to Kentucky, where he was arrested very quickly. The most unsurprising thing was his defense. Of course, he defended himself, and his argument basically boiled down to, look at me. I'm a PhD. I'm way too smart to have enacted a crime like this. Well, it didn't fly, and he's now in jail for the rest of his life. So while I definitely had weird feelings from the start, I honestly never thought he would be capable of cold-blooded murder. Story number 20. I was quite good friends with a murderer. We met when we both worked at a village pub. After our shifts, we would finish around 10 p.m., then cycle over to the next village to see how many drinks we could fit in before last call. He had a pretty troubled past. He had been in foster care for most of his life and already had over 100 convictions despite being only 18. We would talk a lot, often about pretty deep things when drinking. He once told me it was like having therapy. He also mentioned that he had been diagnosed with paranoid psychosis and could have manic episodes. I thought he might have been exaggerating, although things could get pretty crazy sometimes. One time, we were playing darts in a village pub, and he accidentally walked behind the bar while trying to find the toilet. The barman, who by a strange coincidence also later became a murderer, started shouting at him. My friend went back to the dartboard, grabbed a dart, and threw it at the barman. It hit him in the arm and stuck there. Then he tipped a table over and started pulling pictures off the wall and smashing them. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, how, within about 20 seconds, everything turned into chaos. I grabbed him in a bear hug and pulled him outside, and at that point, he calmed down. We cycled off and he laid low at my house for the night. But the next morning he still had to see his probation officer. That's when I started becoming wary of him. He even admitted he had considered robbing my house but had changed his mind. Around that time I left the job at the pub and didn't see him as often. About 2 years later, the last time I saw him was on a bus about 2 weeks before the murder. He told me he had a job as an apprentice with National Rail, doing railroad maintenance. He genuinely seemed to be doing okay with his life. We made plans to go for a drink again, but it never happened. 2 days later, he went to his stepdad's flat late at night and broke down the door with a cricket bat. He slit his stepdad's throat while he slept, then walked into town and entered a taxi office. Covered in blood, he asked the staff if he could clean himself up because he had just murdered someone.